If you just so happen to be new to GlobeTrotting, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It would certainly mean a lot as I try and grow the channel that little bit further. So as Boeing recently delayed the 777-9's entry into service, could a prospective 777-10 bring life back to the program as the next aircraft they go on to launch? But firstly, what would a 777-10 be? Further derivatives of an aircraft program will always be proposed at some point. You can pretty much guarantee this. This is primarily driven by a manufacturer's bid to continuously innovate and ensure that they're covering all possible angles to try and obtain as much market share as possible and fend off competition while they're at it too. Maybe also provide the answer to an airline's calls. The 777-10, which might I add was actually proposed, would look to be a variant that would extend the fuselage length of the 777-9 to basically accommodate a capacity increase in a similar sense to what we've seen take place with the 787 Dreamliner and over there, the Dash 10. Some onlookers would consider it the ideal 747 or A380 replacement if we're just looking at it from a pure capacity standpoint. If released, the aircraft would likely fit into that 400 to 500 seat market with room for companies to optimize their cabin configuration further to meet demands laid out by their customer base and just generally themselves as a business. Whether this is more inclined to a high density config or if you're looking at a more premium layout. As more airlines have moved away from quad-engined aircraft in favour of new efficient twin-engine types, some airlines have battled with an inability to really replace these larger planes as we see capacity reductions occur in the next-gen fleet. The 777-10 would look to eradicate those battles and provide a true solution. And such a variant was briefly discussed in the mid-2010s, just years after Boeing revealed the 777X program for the very first time, which included the smallest 777-8 and the 777-9. But would it work with airlines? It would come, again, primarily as an increase in total passenger capacity, rather than, say, the range increases felt on another variant. So compromises would have to be made. Expectations outlined years ago would have seen basically the gap between the smallest 777X and the largest in the Dash 10 at around 100 seats, and that's a pretty big difference. However, given the Dash 10 had no, say, exact specific specifications, it was never outright confirmed, and this is basically speculation based on other studies from analysts who looked into the 777-10. The question that remains unanswered today is if this variant would have worked with airlines. Best estimates, however, would always go on to highlight that this would be a plane that would be a niche-based one, really only being required for your ultra-high capacity routes that were present and for airlines that were maybe looking to replace their A380 with something as close as possible. And speaking on the A380, while it is experiencing a resurgence, you've got to remember that this is being primarily driven by airlines' inability to acquire wide-body aircraft that are part of that next-gen fleet on time, and therefore they're resorting to older, less efficient planes. Demand requires us to look into the future for an aircraft of this sheer scale, and the capacity of a rumoured 777-10 is something that's not been there. Excluding maybe Emirates, who didn't call for this variant exactly, but did call for a new A380 on several occasions, which shows that their appetite was there, at some point at least, for a higher capacity plane to obviously replace their existing A380-800s. They've really, though, been one of the only ones. So as a result, if a 777-10 was to ever release, it very much would fill a niche similar to other 777 variants we've seen release in recent decades that were either for the purpose of aiding a range requirement or to fill into different capacity slots. And again, you've also got the element that airlines are moving on. They know they need to figure out their future fleet plan with what is currently available for the next 5 to 10, 15 years. Unless something was to dramatically change, they're going to go for what's on market currently. What is also needing to be remembered is Boeing is a damaged brand. Since the 777-10 was first proposed back in the mid-2010s, a lot has happened, and I'd argue that the plane maker is absolutely not what it once was. It's damaged, bruised, and for some, I no doubt you'd probably argue beyond repair. With every passing month, progress to really rebuild continuously feels like it is being undone. Unfortunately, this puts Boeing in a position where launching new programs is highly unlikely. Don't get me wrong, work still needs to be conducted in the background to ensure that they have a new plane in the future to compete with Airbus, but from not being able to increase production right across 2024 to the most recent lengthy strike action, they're up against it in more ways than one. And when you consider that there was a recent announcement that they would delay the first delivery of the 777-9 to 2026, and that's ballooning out to now some 6 years, well, it's highlighted probably where the priorities have to lie, and that's working through what they have. By the time the 777-9, the 777-8, and the 777-8F are all certified, we'll probably be approaching 2030, if not after that. So is the 777-10 going to be required at that point? Potentially, but at the same time, is there going to be new technology available to Boeing to implement into a new plane? That's all part of what they're studying now. So this is a plane that still remains unlikely. It received its greatest backing in 2016 when Boeing confirmed the technical feasibility of it in a report by Flight Global. However, that technical feasibility study is quite scarily almost a decade ago, and like I said, much has changed, not just for the industry, but also for Boeing. Since that feasibility study, the 777X has remained uncertified, yet to enter commercial service, and it'll be several years before it does. The Dash 8 remains unbuilt and of little interest, and a new freighter variant is the focus for the future. No customer has expressed a strong desire, at least publicly, for a 777-10 like plane, with the Dash 9 and counterpart A350-1000 seen as the best on the market high-capacity alternatives. And ultimately, Boeing has greater problems that it needs to focus in on. There will always be the ifs, buts, and maybes, and that could also undoubtedly center around if a pandemic had never occurred, Boeing hadn't encountered difficulties, and if the 777X had entered service as intended at the top of the decade. But all of these things didn't pan out the way it was, and that's why we sit today in the mid-2020s with the 777-10 looking pretty unlikely, and that is despite a technical feasibility study showing that the plane maker was really just doing its due diligence. Is this a variant that you'd like to see one day? Do you believe there truly is demand for it? Or do you feel that the current portfolio in the 777X family is adequate enough until something else comes in the future? Thanks for watching right here on GlobeTrotting. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you in a couple of days.
And we'll fly.